Well, it's not
David,
really.
what do the rules say about reconstructions of existing or repairs? That seems pertinent.
As I understand, the issue is how many square feet are affected.
And this could be just small patches. Or
Well, if it's small patches, that's always been the case. If you do, I mean, you've had in Connecticut Avenue in the last 3 years, huge amounts of sidewalk replaced and repaired by DDOT and by developers. I don't see any harm, but that's, you're the commissioners, you're going to decide. But I happen to be signed up to testify at that same hearing, and one of my major points will be this huge new development of the green infrastructure standards, which I've been advocating for over a year, advocated at their last hearing, and pushed to get done before Director Bellamy and Chief Engineer Nicholson leave the department. I'm very glad that they've done it.
David, is the standards that came out today, is that part of the sustainable DC plan?
I think so. My
Yeah,
guess is that
which I
that's
was
what the mayor,
saying.
I guess is that the mayor is talking about that at Langley Education Center right now as we meet here.
Well, actually,
maybe
it says that the sustainable DC plan calls for expanding safe and secure infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists.
Yeah, but that's nice pious judgments, pious wishes. What's happened today is a real turnaround. It's all become standards in the manuals that DDOT uses to govern its own contractors and govern other people. So it's a big development. If I'd been here earlier at the meeting rather than at the Board of Trustees of UDC, I would have made a point in the community discussion of a development. I think this is a huge turnaround.
Okay.
But that's up to you whether you put it in.
I don't know how this would...
I know, I have an idea where to put it in.
So hold on, do you have any interest in putting these whereas clauses in?
I can.
Yeah,
know
I
where to
think
put it.
I understand where he's going with it. I'm just not sure how we can.
I do. I have an idea.
Okay.
I don't either, I don't know what it is, but,
Okay, Karen,
so
what's your?
what are the whereas clauses you wish to add?
I would just, under whereas move GC, DDOT's multimodal, I would add another whereas saying, whereas DDOT approved today, whatever it's called.
I've sent an email to each of you.
I haven't seen it yet.
But you'll find it on your...
I would just put in a very simple,
DDOT approved on
whatever.
4/22/14.
Yeah,
The new
New.
green infrastructure standards.
whatever it's called, period.
The standards. What's the rest of the sentence?
That's it, for they approved it.
Okay, fine, then we got it.
That's
Comma,
it.
and that should be where, under,
I would put under whereas move GC, DDOT's.
right, I agree.
It should be new green infrastructure design standards.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's it.
I
It's
got
very
it.
simple.
Why don't you, since that's part of sustainable DC,
Why don't we just
why don't
add
you just
that?
put it in right under?
Yeah, and whereas whatever.
Where's the standard DC
whereas
plans for expanding safe
sustainable
infrastructure,
DC.
Actually, green infrastructure design standards. The new is just because it's new.
It's
not part of the
green
title.
infrastructure design standards is what it's called. We can just do it right after the sustainable DC plan.
That's what I said, whatever,
I
just
got
add
it.
the one line.
We got it. Is everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, with that revised motion, is there any more discussion from commissioners on the motion? Okay, let's put it to a vote. All in favor of the revised resolution with those new whereas clauses? Say
One.
aye.
One whereas clause.
One whereas clause.
Aye.
Say aye. Passes 7-0.
Was it seconded?
It was seconded.
Yeah. Mary got it.
Okay, thank you. Next topic, resolution to post historic preservation landmark application for Intelsat building. So basically, PC Preservation League filed a landmark nomination for the Intelsat building. And everyone has gotten a copy of that, I believe, and it's on the web, so the public can read it. After reviewing it, I personally had concerns with it, primarily because the building is so young. It's about 25, 26 years old. And have is kind of my feeling of why it doesn't deserve to be landmarked yet. So basically, I drafted a letter to the Historic Preservation Review Board, which effectively says, so I'll make a motion to approve this letter/resolution, which I'll explain here. So basically, we'll write a letter to the chairperson of HPRB. So the first item is, I thought the application doesn't list the owner, at least the application I saw didn't list the correct owner of the building. So I don't know, I just wanted to point that out. And then secondly, I get into the historic preservation laws. Basically, in DC, there's kind of like three things they look at under these regs. One's like a list of items for a building, and then one's whether there's been enough time for it to qualify for a designation. Sufficient time shall have passed since they achieved significance or were constructed to permit professional evaluation of them in a historic context. And then there's a third rule, which I don't have in front of me. To me, that's where this struggles. So what this resolution does is looks at what some other jurisdictions do. For the federal, for the feds, for the Federal Register, and certain other states that have adopted this, there's a thing called the 50-year rule. Basically, unless the building's 50 years, it shouldn't be nominated, but there are exceptions to this rule. One that I was researching and read a bunch of research on is basically showing a special significance. So why is this building that's young special? What's so special about this building that it deserves to be on the landmark list of the federal or whatever state because it's less than 50 years? So I basically, this letter lays that out. This letter was circulated on our listserv, and I sent it to the Chevy Chase listserv as well. And basically, I explained what my research found on this rule and why I didn't think it fits. Primarily, the thing that I was concerned about is this application cites a lot of stuff about when the building was built, people at that time, and doesn't really talk about anything today. And so I decided to do a little of my own research and talk to people about what they thought about the building today, and it wasn't nearly as positive. Obviously, I didn't have the chance to set up a blue ribbon panel of architects to talk about the building, but noting in my research that no one had done that in recent history, and there's no articles on the building in recent history of any kind of detail, it seemed to me that maybe today's views should be incorporated, and then we should look at the whole picture for a nomination. So that's where I got to on that. So effectively, there's a letter which has been revised about 100 times, but you all have
The final.
my quote-unquote final until we discuss it here, which sets that out. So that is my motion to send this letter. Is there a second for this motion to send this letter?
She's here to discuss it.
No, that's fine. We have to approve this, then we'll talk.
I second.
So second. Okay, so discussion. So I guess someone from DC Preservation Lease here to kind of tell us a little background, so feel free to come up and talk about it. And then what we'll do is we'll have Commissioner chat about the resolution and ask her questions, and then the community can speak, and we'll go from there. Thank you. Thanks.
Be sure to state your name.
Hi, everyone. So I am Tisha Allen. I'm with the DC Preservation League, and I am the Outreach and Grants Manager with DCPL. So I'm just here briefly to just sort of recap the history of the building and sort of our motivation for nominating the building. So I provided a flyer at the table with the agenda, so if you don't have it, feel free to grab it, and it has my information on the back if you'd like to contact us. So our interest started with this building in 2012 when it was sold to a developer. So the original tenant of the building moved out, and we saw there was a critical need to landmark the building, not only for its significance in modern architecture, but also just to encourage appropriate and compatible design for future development. So hopefully everyone can check out the handout, and also the nomination is available online if you're not familiar with the building. So it was constructed in 1984 for the International Telecommunications Satellite Organization, nicely known as Intelsat, which I'll refer to it from now on. So they were a high-tech international consortium managing communication satellites. So the building operated as their operations center and their headquarters for their organization. So this particular organization formed in 1964, and by about the 1980s, they decided that they wanted a very monumental building to sort of, to showcase exactly what they were doing with technology and their innovations. And they also wanted it to be something that was distinctive and that would be a lasting emblem for the organization. So they held an international design competition. There are over 100 architects that they considered. Then it was narrowed down to about 6 architects from Japan, from United States. So they chose the design of John Andrews. John Andrews was born in Australia, but he studied in Harvard University. So he was working in the United States at that time. So he would later go on to design Gund Hall, which is also at Harvard University, and Kent State School of Art in Ohio. So Andrews was lauded for his design, not only for its modern design, but also for its incorporation of natural light, energy efficiency, and also, most importantly, its conformity to the nature of the site. So if you have been to the site, you can tell how well they formed this campus. So I encourage you to read the full nomination. We've proposed this nomination. It will go before HPRB, Historic Preservation Review Board, May 22nd. So it's a month from today. So we encourage you to read the nomination, and feel free to contact us if you have any questions or if you want to submit your own comments to HPRB. But we nominated the building under Criterion D for architecture for DC inventory, and also under Criterion C for the National Register. And so the third criterion consideration is Criterion G. And this is criteria considerations are for certain kinds of properties that are not usually nominated. So these include cemeteries, religious properties, buildings that have been moved, and also buildings that are 50 years or younger. So these are sort of exceptions that are worthy of listing. And in particular with this particular property, because the Intelsat organization occupied the building until they moved out in 2011 when it was sold, that is the sort of, we're capturing that the original construction in 1984 as the period of significance and going on until today. So we believe that the building is exceptional, and it renders exceptional architectural merit and justifies inclusion on the DC inventory. And one other thing that we'd like to mention is that there is precedent for this in DC. The Arena Stage was nominated when it was, I think, only 16 years old. Dulles International Airport was also nominated before it was 50 years old. And Third Church of Christ Scientists. So there is precedent. This is not the first time it's happened. So we just wanted to make that statement. And we understand there's a resolution of opposition, but if you feel as though, there are still questions, we encourage you to perhaps table it and sort of discuss these.
Great.
Yeah.
So let's start with commissioner questions. Bob.
I'm in favor of the resolution. I don't have any questions.
Mary Beth?
So what I'm worried about is that if this gets historic preservation status, it's really going to curtail a future development. And this is a really key spot for the hub of Van Ness and all the exciting plans that we have for our neighborhood. Honestly, it's not as bad looking as some of the other buildings in Van Ness. So in some ways, I'd like to tear them down and keep this. But that's not really what we're voting on today. But I guess, what I'd just like to understand is if someone came in with exciting new plans for this building, how constrained would they be by the historic designation?
So they are constrained under the Secretary of Interior standards, but what nominating the building would do as a landmark, they're eligible for tax credits. So there are numerous sites you've probably seen all around DC that are tax credit projects. Woody's Warehouse downtown. I mean, there are numbers that I could go through, but it's a 20% tax credit that it's very popular for developers. So I would say that it would actually encourage development, and there are a lot of people that seek out development
They
properties.
get the credit
historic
in
properties.
exchange for what?
They get a 20%, so they have to abide by Secretary of Interior standards, but they get 20%
By
tax
preserving
credit.
the look and feel of the building,
No,
they
not,
then get the
wait a minute.
credit.
Wait a minute.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. From what I understand,
Mm-hmm.
and not being honest, you can look at with the building where Sears used to be, whatever it's Best Buy
Heckinger's.
now.
Heckinger's.
They built an apartment building on top of it. You can gut the whole interior of the Intelsat building. The Owl's Nest, which is across the street from the church on Chesapeake Street, Donatelli rebuilt, that's
That
historic.
is historic.
That's historic. They subdivided the property, built another house on it, and Donatelli built a big expansion onto the house. So it's not.
But it's on the DC register.
But it's on the DC register and historic register.
Correct.
The government register. So you aren't really totally constrained. You can add on to the Intelsat building, you can build more pods, you can build in the interior, as
And-
long as it's
well,
just the front.
but one of
And
the
you can gut the
problems-
inside.
I mean, one of the problems that has been pointed out by Office of Planning people, for example, of this building, is that it's set so far back. So the logical thing to do if you're a developer and you want to connect with the street and with the community is to
In the
move.
metro.
Yeah, in the metro, is to infill some of this.
You
I mean,
could.
There are
want
things to
do
do,
and everything.
perhaps
But I'm
underground
not sure that
or.
you could do that.
I think it creates a challenge for the architects, but I think there are numerous sites where people have found creative ways, and it also gives the community a lot more input than you would have otherwise about what goes there and what's happening with the building. So while
How does that work?
because it has to go through the Historic Preservation Review Board, which is
So
the
it
same
comes to
process that this
ANC
is going
first.
through.
Right.
So it goes to the ANC first, and your comments are taken very heavily with HPRB into consideration. So you'll be able to even sit down with the architects that are redesigning it and have input on that side. So it allows numerous possibilities for you all to contribute to that development.
Is it true that you can have, they have a term for it, it's something about considering constraints, that an ANC or the Preservation Board can put on the construction, or what can be done with the building?
Yes.
So they can be very minimal, or they can be very oppressive, like,
Well,
for
they-
an example, Old Georgetown Board.
Well,
They
they're
have
oppressive.
very, very strict rules in Georgetown. But there are other areas, like you've said, that certain buildings that are extremely loose as far as what can be done to the building.
All you have to do is look at the arena stage here that was constructed in
Right.
1960.
And that
look
was
at
That's
listed.
a perfect
today.
example.
That was listed
And look
before
at
it was
it
50 years
today.
old.
Look at Third Church, which doesn't exist now.
No, that third church got taken down.
Right.
I think what I'm saying, and I think everybody needs to remember something. Usually HPRB allows you to alter the back of a building. And what you're seeing on Connecticut Avenue is actually the back
Back
of
of
the
the building.
Intelsat.
The front
The
is.
front is on the other side.
I don't
I mean, there's a-
I don't know enough about.
I've been to
I-
How it
HPRB.
is.
There's
Like-
another
Years and
question.
years.
What,
So anyway, so do we have questions on the application?
yes, I have-
So Sal, you have a
Oh,
question?
I
on
thought
the-
you were going this way.
Well, we just
Okay.
go Sal, you'll go Sal.
Karen wants to go.
I don't care.
How does it work with the surrounding neighborhood? Because all the embassies and, this is a technical question, and the park, the Intelsat Park, Intelsat, and UDC are on United States federal land.
Exactly.
So can you explain how that, what that does with this application?
So this application, there are proposed boundaries, and now those boundaries can be changed. The Historic Preservation Office can decide that they want to change those boundaries. But as of right now, it's the original boundaries of the site. So it only includes the Intelsat site. It does
Site.
not include the rest of the campus. So it's just the landscaping around in the site.
Okay, can the
include the
park
park.
be, yeah, can the
Is the
park,
park included?
let me finish. Can the park, yeah, she just said that. She said
yeah.
the boundary line.
So there.
Can they build on the park?
Can you please clarify what you just said about what part is encompassed by it? Because it's an awful lot of surrounding property there, and it's very unclear as to what you just said. Can you clarify, please?
Absolutely. So it's the area that's so if you look on the DC Property Quest site, it's that actual parcel. So it's the landscape around the building as well.
So just to clarify.
Yes.
All the way to Connecticut Avenue and all the way down the hill to whatever that
Tilden.
street is.
Before
Tilden.
Tilden. Mhm.
So essentially, like 5 acres of land.
7.
I think it's actually 11 acres to be
Yeah,
exact.
11
yeah.
acres.
An entire 11 acres.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I
That's,
guess.
you weren't exactly straightforward on that issue.
I apologize if I didn't say that. It is in the nomination. It's 11.3 acres of the site. So there is a map in the nomination that provides that whole entire area. So I apologize if I was unclear about that.
So I guess my
we wanted to get-
so Dave, hold on. So my question is, this is a big. Have you been in the building?
Yeah,
I have never been inside the
I
building,
Okay,
no.
so you should go inside. I mean, so
The person that wrote the
I
nomination
worked.
did.
I worked with a bunch of the developers that were bidding on this
Mm-hmm.
property, not the winners. So I had a lot of discussions with them about trying to retrofit the building and do things. If you've been in the building, it's kind of, it reminds me of Charles de Gaulle Airport. It's kind of bizarre. It's basically, there's
Pods.
offices around these pods and the centers are open.
Right.
So no modern building today would ever be built like that, and it's not clear to me why what you even do with it. And that was the problem with all the people bidding on this property is what do you do with this weird design that was built solely for Intelsat's needs and
Right.
not the needs of today.
But-
And I guess the question is why did you want to nominate the building? Why don't you nominate like the facade? That's the interesting part, like the part on International
Well,
Drive or something like that.
So with the National Register, so you are essentially landmarking the exterior. As soon as you do tax credits, then you get involved in the inside. But right now, it's essentially landmarking the building, and then as far as anything that they do, they have flexibility on the interior to do some form of gutting.
Right. That's how
But they
I
just,
read it.
They just can't go for the tax credits if they gut.
Can you
So
explain, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I smell a rat. This has been nominated based on, and I don't see any mention in here about the exceptional architecture, but I do see a mention, and you haven't described what that is, but what you have described is that it's being landmarked because of exceptional use of light and airiness. Yet, and so that's going to be part of the application. Yet you're telling the board here, the commission, that it would be perfectly fine for a developer to come in and to redo it if they're talented enough. I'm not sure I understand how they would be able to do that and HPRB would be able to approve that if the very reason that it's being landmarked is because of the air and the space. Sounds like you can't really do any retrofitting to it.
Sir,
Could you say
So-
who
so
you
hold on,
are?
hold on,
Could
hold
you-
on.
East Sealy
So
from
I
Ward 3
think-
Vision.
So I
You can
think
repeat that.
I think it's
Who are you? Can you state your
East
name?
Sealy from Ward 3 Vision.
so
Okay.
I think that's an interesting
I
question,
can
which
answer
I'd be
that.
curious to hear your thoughts on, and then we'll return it back to the commissioner.
Sure. To answer your question, so the nomination discusses all of the points that make it exceptional architecture, yes. So we talk about the energy efficiency, the inclusion of light, all to say that this building was very intentionally built and to be something exceptional. So pinpointing these things that make it exceptional don't necessarily mean that HPRB will then review it and say, okay, you're getting rid of all of this energy efficiency. That's not the case. You have to update these buildings with modern technology, update it with HVAC systems. So we're not freezing, the systems that are in the building right now. So that's not the case.
That's a tautology.
So anyway,
You know what, wait a
so,
second.
hey, Karen.
Well,
So
we'll
the
calm
commissioners
that down.
have questions on the nomination.
Yeah,
Karen, your question.
no, Sally was going.
Sally,
I'm
you
not-
have a question?
I would like to, well, I have 2 other questions.
Okay.
But I'd like to make a comment or rebuttal to Steve's comment and how you answered it to a certain degree. I would like to cite a building that everybody knows in this country. It is the Rotunda building at the University of Virginia. It is one of the top 10 historic preservation buildings in our country. 100 years ago, it was not historic. They had a huge fire. Stanford White came in and was able to do a new interior. he did a total new interior. It was very pretty. It was a two-story space, beautiful pilasters, very much Chicago Expo architecture. It became on the National Register, and at that time, the UVA decided they wanted to put it back to its normal usage, how it was planned by Jefferson. They were able, when it became on the National Register, they were able to come in and completely gut the interior of the rotunda and put it back. I'm just taking this as an example. I'm not saying we put this back, but that's an example of how far-reaching a building can be on the National Register. So that's to
So
answer.
they required a gutting to restore it to its original
Yes,
purpose.
but I mean, that's what they wanted to do. I mean, they could have done the reverse, it could have been whatever, and they put a Stanford White in it. But the point is not what was done, but how it was interpreted on the National Register and what could be done with a building. Okay, so I don't know if you want to answer
So
that, but that's an example. The other question I have is, were you in touch with the owner at any point, and where does the new owner just stand on this application?
So I don't think that the owner was contacted, so I don't know that we have any approval from them for the nomination of the building.
He probably was from the HPRB.
They would have to,
They would
So
have, yeah.
State Department owns the land.
yeah.
Right, State
So
Department owns the land.
What
So
is
they-
their view of this, since it's on their land?
We haven't heard any negative comments back from them, and it's public document, so they're well aware of it, but we haven't heard back
Okay.
from them.
Have you reached out to the architect? He's alive. Curious what his thoughts are.
The architect,
I don't
no.
think this is one of his masterpieces. The CN Tower, I think, is outstanding.
Well, but it's
But
good at our
have
city.
you called him? He is.
I believe I did not personally write the nomination. John D. Ferrari wrote the nomination, and he did try to contact the architect. I don't think he had any luck getting in touch with him, but he did try to contact him.
This architect also, which everybody knows, is a Space Needle in Seattle.
And you did the Space Needle.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
mean, that's just an
Let's
interesting,
check the
then what-
Space Needle.
interesting,
Anyway.
yeah, point.
And to the other point, also, there is a very big difference between designating the building as the exterior shell and designating the interior.
Right.
DC has a very strict sort of interior designation, and this is not up for interior designation. So that's very clear, and
Okay.
no way we're trying to landmark the inside.
I don't have any questions. Bob, do you have a question?
I don't think we've heard from Karen.
No, that's okay, you can go.
Oh.
This building was innovative and really energy efficient for 1984.
Right.
It's terrible for today. By today's standards, it could not get LEED certified. When you say that it has to be updated, you're talking about getting rid of the things that make this building distinctive.
I would say I would disagree that it wouldn't necessarily need to be all of them. There are rooftop gardens. There are things that are on the top that would not need to be demolished in order to make it energy efficient. That could be incorporated.
The louvers on the side were designed to reflect the light at various times of day away or into the building. That's part of the exterior. That's the failed technology.
I would imagine. I'm not an architect, so I couldn't come up with a solution right now. But
I think that it's basically ugly. It's a failed technology. It's a young building. It's not the architect's best work, and this would put a major roadblock in the way of putting something significant in that space. So I'm very much opposed.
okay, I didn't know if there was a question.
Karen, do you have a question?
A few things. Years ago, when I worked for the home builders, and I'm going back to probably the early 90s, late 80s, I was tasked by our executive vice president that a group of French builders were coming over and to find a smart building because that's what they wanted to see. This was the only smart building in this city at that time. And I took them there. I couldn't get them out. They almost got shot because their guards had real guns. But anyway, and they kept going into the wrong areas. But it's true. Bill Chiquette, from Gilbane Construction, who built the building, and it's some things that aren't in your nomination, believe it or not. because of the way Intelsat wanted to occupy the building, instead of building from the center out, they built from the outside in and hoped they would meet. And their boardroom, including the board table, the paneled walls, are all made from the trees that were cut down from that site to build the building. I mean, and each one of those round things is actually a solar pod. And when the building was occupied, it was very lively and cheerful and open. The offices all opened up onto gardens and lakes and rooftop. It happened to be a gorgeous building inside. Our ANC had an office in there for years.
But we were kicked out, yeah.
Until we were kicked out, thanks to 9/11. But anyway, we had ANC meetings there. We had Forest Hill Citizens Association meetings there. So the building is not a dead building, as I read in one of your initial drafts. When it's empty, yeah, it's going to be dead. But when people are occupying it,
Right.
even the DC office of cable was in that building. That's where their offices are, or they still might be. I don't know.
Well, the TV station.
The TV station, whatever. I am not going to support your letter because I do think buildings can be, the New York builder who bought the building happens to like the building. He wrote that article that was in, what is it, Washington Business Week?
Yes.
He likes the building. He wants to redo the interior and bring in retail and everything else.
Okay.
I mean, I just want, and I want to say something because I disagreed with your initial draft. You said ANC 3F conducted an informal survey. ANC 3F met with bidders. None of us were part of that process.
Okay.
You know, if it's you, it needs to just say ANC 3F 01. In the same way with this, I've never seen this informal survey of constituents.
That says it's
at all.
ugly and discouraging.
I've never seen it.
So, anyway, okay.
I'm just saying.
That's fine. I mean, I surveyed people that I talked to that I know have opinions of this.
And
Not this building specifically, but I speak to about issues.
And I really think
I
today,
apologize to everyone I was not able to reach. I can't reach all 14,000 of you. But
No, but I
try
mean,
my
it's-
best, and
even
that's
the
why we have
ANC
a
wasn't.
meeting like this.
but even the ANC didn't see it. But I'm just saying, a lot of buildings that were built 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago, if you convene a blue ribbon panel of architects today and they look at them, they're probably going to say they're ugly, because a lot of them were. So I don't think you can go to convene a panel today to judge a building built 20-something
I
years
think
ago.
You absolutely can, and I think that's part of what makes the buildings that are landmarked, like Dulles Airport, where today some people think it's ugly, but that is a masterpiece. I look at Intelsat, I don't see all those masterpieces.
I look at
things
Dulles,
going in.
I
In all
look at-
honesty,
see,
but
I guess I look at Dulles and think it's ugly, so it's individual taste.
Well,
Fair
I
enough,
agree.
but-
It's individual
but
taste.
whatever, it's an extraordinary.
Just like
building.
Arena Stage, it's individual
So I
taste.
guess, so is there any more questions for her?
No.
No, okay. So.
I have
we'll
a comment
open the
on
floor
I have a comment on the letter though.
Okay.
I'd say I almost feel a little nostalgic for the rhetorical questions that were in the original draft now.
Too bad.
From a just a format perspective, I already communicated this to you. I would be. I think the last section, the current views of the Intelsat building are negative. Don't really add much support to the argument that is laid out in the first part of the letter. It kind of reads like, we just don't like it, so it's okay if it gets torn down. I think you make a coherent argument in the first part, and then I think you undercut yourself with this last section. So.
I mean, there are
I
definitely
guess-
different views by many people. I mean, some people like the building, some people hate the building.
Sure.
I don't think that should not be the issue. It should be whether it's a building of noteworthy saving, and if it can be used credibly in the future. That should be the question our ANC is thinking
Right.
or responds to.
But I think the answer to that question, as you say, is not a matter of taste. It doesn't.
Right.
It's not a question of whether
No.
we think it's ugly any more than one person or another might think a Picasso is ugly or
Correct.
beautiful. The point is, does this, in the larger context of architecture in the city or architecture in the country or the modernist movement, does this occupy a special place?
In the district.
And I haven't looked at this in the depth that you have, but I am not convinced yet. I may be convinced if there is this blue ribbon panel, if somebody who knows these things, knows modernist architecture better than I do, could look at this and say, yes, this does occupy a special place for these reasons. If that's the case, then I'm all for preserving, preserving the facade, preserving what needs to be preserved. But in the absence of that, I'm not convinced yet that.
Just so you
Then
know.
that's a good question.
Wait a minute, wait a
Have you
second, wait a
talked
minute.
to the AIA, DC AIA?
No.
Or any of the,
No, we haven't reached out, but that's, I mean, absolutely something that someone could do, and there's obviously a lot of opportunity at this point. We have a month until we go to HPRB, so.
and that could be extended,
That,
so there's time to do this.
Let me, Malachi, just so you know, HPRB is a blue ribbon panel. They have architects, they have some of the best in the city are on that.
Basically, we're making a recommendation to them.
But they are a blue
They
ribbon
actually
panel. There are like
decide.
10 of them, if I'm not mistaken.
So I think at this,
Oh, sorry. Would you consider deleting the, I agree with Manoli
Okay.
about the last current use of the Intelsat building are negative, and I wonder if you would consider deleting that part, because I think the letter stands on its own without
so
that.
which, so,
From current views of the Intelsat building are
Yes.
negative, down through
so I feel like the second to last paragraph could supplement this section, or do you,
this, the one ANC 3
above,
believes.
in the states?
Sorry.
So this, so if you want to delete this, it says this and this. There we go.
And you're saying that, I feel like that's a panel of experts has reviewed it. That's what.
They will be
No,
reviewing it.
no, they will be reviewing it.
HPRB
Nobody's
is-
reviewed it yet.
And just to be clear on HPRB, in a lot of cases, they review it once, don't like the application, send it back.
Right.
There's a big give and take.
Okay, fine.
Malachi, there's a big give and take. If they don't like the application, they send it back for clarification, they can make changes to it, so they have their own back and forth process. And they have experts on their staff who will review this application and make their own recommendations. So they have their own historic staff, I should say.
Okay.
I mean,
So
I want-
Mary Beth has proposed I delete current views of the Intelsat building are negative. The first paragraph under that and the 3 bullets. So I'm okay with that revision.
So you're taking current views of Intelsat building are negative
Negative.
totally out.
And then the paragraph under and the 3 bullets.
And what?
Three bullets.
Okay.
Okay.
Those are all coming out, the 3 bullets?
Okay. Yeah, you
So
just said that.
I guess at this point I'd like. What?
No, the audience wants to speak.
I'll let them speak. in a
He's going to,
second.
that's what I was just saying.
So at this
Can we get
point, what
speak
I'd like
more?
to do is invite a few members of the audience who are interested in speaking on this to speak about their views on the application.
If
I
they've
don't
read it.
want to hear about your views of whether you think it's ugly or pretty. Doesn't matter for the applications. But if you have views on this application, feel free to come on up. And we'll take 4.
Actually, I'm a member of the DC Preservation League too, and all the historical societies in DC. I'm Barbara Bates, and I've read the application, and
Barbara, didn't you write the history of Forest Hills?
Let her speak.
yes,
She wrote the book on the history of Forest Hills.
no, well, the architectural, the domestic architecture chapter. I think this is the most unique modernist building in the city, and it's ours. It's in our neighborhood. I don't need to go over what's in the application. I agree with it. The fitting into the landscape, the green building that it is. But let me add a couple of things I don't think you mentioned. The part that faces Tilden, that's where WJLA went in 1988 when they left the now demolished building up the street. And I bet you they'd love to come back. I don't think they wanted to leave, is my understanding. There are also embassies in there now. There used to be and there still are. Those are just examples of uses, current uses and previous uses. And John Andrews is a unique architect, well noted. And there are a number of people, neighbors, that would like to have been here. They're out of town. I think this just got announced in the Wednesday
Yes.
Northwest Current. So I'm sorry there are not others here to speak in support of it as well. Support of its nomination. I'd like to see it stay.
May the 22nd, she said.
No, I said, when's our next meeting?
Next meeting,
Good
May
evening.
18th.
So do we have time to?
Hello, I'll be quick. My name is Kate Dell, and I live down near Van Ness in the Van Ness North Co-op. There are a couple of things about this. I don't feel that my ANC is ready to vote yes or no on this resolution. I think it would have been proper for you to have brought the resolution to an earlier meeting and discuss it with background knowledge about the resolution, and then decide how you wanted to proceed. But to bring a negative, a quest for a negative vote on a resolution that has not had a proper public hearing, I think is not in the best interest of our democracy. I also understand that it's usual for an ANC to invite the Historic Preservation League if they've offered a resolution for a preservation landmark. The ANC, as a courtesy, and also to inform yourselves, because I think some of you don't really understand what this is about, to have somebody come from the Historic Preservation. I forget your name. Tisha's here tonight because I kind of reached out to them and I said, do you know what's going on? Do you know why our ANC wants to vote negatively about this? I knew nothing. And I'm not quite sure when you say you had you spoke to members of the community and you had negative feedback about this. I think it was a very limited pool that you drew from. And as you even said to me tonight, that you have some people that you contacted. Well, you have to reach out beyond that list. You have to go out to the listservs. You have to, I don't know, do more than you did. And I really don't think you're ready to vote on this tonight. And I'd appreciate your saying this is a good discussion, it's a good beginning, and go back and read the resolution by the Historic Preservation League. I don't know if you've read it.
I have.
You know, do your homework and then come back. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that.
No, I think you make a lot of valid points.
Yes.
I mean, I wish the timing was able to handle more discussion on this. When I initially spoke with Historic Preservation Office, they told me July or later in the year, so I was surprised it was coming up so soon, and it caught me off guard. I think your comments, I apologize for not reaching out to the Historic Preservation League. I'd like to throw out maybe when they're thinking of nominating a building, they reach out to the ANC. That would be nice. Steve.
Yeah, I'm Steve Seelig. I'm part of an organization called Ward 3 Vision. And the discussion about architectural issues I'll put to the side because aside from the fact that my granddad and dad were architects, I'm not an architect. But I do think it's within the ANC's purview to think about some of the elements that you guys talked about here. We've essentially got a parcel that's 11 acres. It's essentially, if you would look at it, and we're in, I would call us in a city, it's essentially a suburban model for you could see the same thing. And in fact, I think the sister building is out on 270. You see it out there. This is a suburban area. In fact, it's well within the ANC's purview to think about issues about what's going to happen to this space if this nomination does go through. And what's going to happen to the space is essentially none of that area, none of the green space, which is fabulous. We need more green space. Of course, there's a gate there, and we can't actually get in there and use it at any particular time. That's fabulous, but it's not part of what I think you guys have been seeing happen in Van Ness and some of the discussions you've had. In particular, I would cite the UDC Student Center, which is going to be built in a way that it is going to address the street. This building will never be able to address the street. It will never be able to come any closer to the street than it currently is. And it does slope back. That was part of what the design was. So essentially, by your supporting this application, or by anybody supporting this application, it's basically saying that space is done. We're doing no more building on that space. We're not going to create more opportunities for better living spaces or anything like that. I'm sorry, but those are the facts when it comes to this. And I think that, so you guys, and I don't know what your resolution says, but I would encourage you as part of your resolution to make mention of that fact that you support these types of buildings that do address the street, where you have mixed-use types of buildings. No commercial venture is going to thrive on that space. That's never going to happen. And so I'd encourage you that that's an appropriate, because you're the ANC, you guys can decide whatever reasons you want to oppose this, and I would encourage you to talk about those economic issues. And the last thing that I would point out, and we've said it before, and Bob mentioned it eloquently, is that I'm very concerned about, if this does go through, the notion that it's the light, it's the way it's designed and the interior, it's the openness of this building that is going to prevent, despite the protestations, any type of new development inside to really increase that space. Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. I didn't interrupt you, but they don't have to deal with a historic designation.
It's only the outside
It's only the
that's
outside.
designated.
No, let's not mix things up here, okay?
You are.
If it, well, no, if there's no designation now. They can do whatever they want now. If it goes through, they're going to be severely limited. And, it's just a tautology here. All right, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is that David?
16th time.
David Bardeen, I live at 4701 Connecticut Avenue Northwest. I served 3 full terms on this ANC, and I was chair for a while. And I have served in the mid-70s as a state historic preservation officer of New Jersey. I value historic preservation, but I don't value the rush of the league in this application, and apparently the board, to move this so fast. Slow this down, either by passing the resolution or something else, because you've heard some things which are just inconsistent with what I know. Look, let's talk first about the landscape around, right? Some of those trees date back to the National Bureau of Standards campus. But what we learned with the
Owl's Nest.
Owl's Nest,
Owl's Nest.
well, we were very interested in the landscape around, and those white oaks, which date back earlier than the Civil War. The board said, no, it's not part of our jurisdiction. We don't protect trees. We don't protect landscape. So I don't know where somebody gets the impression they do. They don't. At least that's what they told us when I was on this
Just as
ANC.
a side note, for Hearst, they protected green space.
They've
in
David,
front of
they've
that
changed.
building, so-
Maybe they've changed.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying it's
changed.
just-
Maybe they
it's
changed.
inconsistent.
Two. Remember, you've heard this split of land ownership, State Department, building ownership, the new people who bought the building with state's consent from Intelsat. That puts a whole other set of protections. The State Department has to agree if somebody wants to deal with a landscape. 3, we do have access to that landscape. They close the gates at night, but we can go there. Finally, and this to me is really critical. You can't let this thing go through without consulting the new owner. We as a community, we as people who live in this neighborhood, have a great stake in what the new owners do with that property. And I think it may be the usual tactic of an advocacy group, and that they're entitled to advocate as hard as they can and as hard as the board, the Historic Preservation Boards, will let them get away with. But it is, in my mind, actually ugly to consider whether this should be or shouldn't be landmarked without a full discussion with the new owners of what they want.
agree.
And when I hear this
I
stuff
agree
about tax
totally.
credit, I want to remind you, and I don't know if you were around at the time, but a few years ago, the Washington Post had a set of first-page exposés about the frauds and the rackets that were going on in the historic preservation and landmarking and tax credit fields. Do we have any reason to believe that the new owners are looking for a tax credit? If they are, why don't they come here and tell you what they're doing and ask them to support
They
it?
are looking for it.
And if they're not looking for a tax credit, let's not talk about tax credits. Let's slow this thing down and not let this move ahead. And if you can get them to put off their hearing till July, fine. And if not, you know, it's all very well to say there are exceptions to the 50-year rule. But by and large, in historic preservation in this very, very young country, 50 years is a pretty damn good rule of thumb, and we don't meet it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We'll have time for one more comment if anyone has one. Otherwise,
Could I just suggest that, I don't know if I already said that we table this, and maybe call a special hearing, invite the owners, invite the preservation
So I've been-
people, invite others.
I've tried for 6 months now to speak to the owners, and every single person I've talked to or tried to reach out to has rejected any discussion with us. So, which is unfortunate because all the other people that were interested in buying the building were having open discussions with us. So,
I've also
Not
written-
with us, with
I've
you.
also
No,
written
I know.
No, not with us, with
twice,
you, Adam.
And I haven't heard back.
so, I mean, and HPO supposedly got a letter from the owners or something, but who knows what it is. And the person I reached out to at State Department, their historic preservation officer, I've not been able to talk to. And I don't even know if they even really know about this. So there's a lot of stuff going on that I don't really know. All I know is there is a hearing next month, and we should
Well, Adam, if
provide
we-
some kind of initial.
I would like to make a recommendation. Based on what I've heard tonight, I do think we need to reach out to HPRB a little more than it's been done, because they have their own historic staff.
Yeah.
If, just as you indicated, they might have a letter from the owner, they might have talked to the owner, and we really don't know.
Correct.
As far as tearing down the building or whatever, just so everybody knows, the Intelsat Park, as I call it, off of Tilden Street,
It's called
that-
Squirrel Park.
Squirrel Park, whatever.
Park, yeah.
Whatever its name is, that was a concession done by the State Department to the neighbors that live in that, what is it called, Tilden Gardens, Tilden, whatever, to that condo building. That was a concession done.
That's part of the
When Intelsat
PUD.
was
It's a
built.
PUD. It was
Yeah,
part
it's
of the
part of
It
PUD.
was part of the PUD, yeah.
Right.
I mean, so that's the green space that everybody's been talking about. But I think we also need to remember this land is owned not by the district and not by the private developer that's bought the building. It's owned by the United States government. So you can't just go in and tear the building down and build what you want.
Well, you can under the ground lease, but
Well,
that's
that's beside the
I
point.
mean, that's.
It did I
My
require an act of
recommendation
Congress,
is-
though, for Intelsat. If I'm not mistaken, and I do believe David knows more about this, it required an act of Congress for Intelsat to continue to operate after it privatized.
Yeah, after it became
Correct. So
Comcast.
they passed that, and then, so there's basically a 99-year ground lease that has an automatic 99-year
Your
extension.
extension.
Okay.
So basically, when they bought this building, they acquired the rights under that lease, which basically say you can do whatever you want. And they bought the building, in my mind, to a developer that values the land, not this building, sorry, historic preservation.
Anyway,
My
my recommendation is that we
from a
try and,
monetary perspective, but.
I would like to try and see us have another meeting maybe in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or I don't know what HPRB's deadline is for us to vote, but we have another ANC meeting scheduled before the hearing. You know, I really think we need to do more on this.
Well,
Okay,
I'd like to
so
make
anyway,
a,
so-
I'd like to make a comment. I, for one, do not feel like we have been, the commissioners, have been given proper background knowledge with the application. We only got this application Friday to review.
I sent it out.
Okay.
Karen sent it out. I didn't see it till Friday. And read it Friday.
Yeah, I sent it around to everyone. a
I didn't
couple weeks
get it.
ago
I didn't
when
get it.
filed.
I didn't get it.
They should have sent you all.
No,
never.
We have not, have you, did you get
Pretty
something?
sure I sent it.
I
around.
didn't.
You got something.
Okay.
I didn't.
When?
I can
A couple
look.
weeks ago.
I didn't.
How many weeks?
Who sent it to you?
I'll look it up.
I think I sent it.
Well, you sent it Friday.
I don't remember
But I
when-
actually looked for it.
I don't
in
remember when I
March.
sent it.
Anyway.
I don't remember when I sent it.
Okay.
I just know
So,
I
yes.
sent it.
I don't feel like we've had enough time to understand the application clearly. enough discussion on it. And I make a recommendation that we write a letter to the HPRB and ask for an extension of time.
Or have it, where we meet before that, we can have a meeting
Yeah,
in 2
but-
weeks.
But, as you said, you thought it was going to be July or August, or later, that we would have time to go through a review process and reach out and have either a community meeting or understand exactly what this application means. And I'm sorry you haven't been able to get to the owner, because that's a key element.
I think also, just to be clear, HPRB staff, and I'm not sure who's this application assigned to.
Kim something?
Kim something? Tim Dene. He's been there for
No,
years.
No, that's not who's doing it, though. It's, I'll look. Kim.
Whatever, whoever's doing it,
I'll talk to her on Friday.
that staff person is going to be writing their own report as to
Kim
whether
Williams.
this building should be landmarked or not,
Right.
or what the boundaries are going to be. We haven't even seen their staff report yet.
Okay.
And usually don't
in
they-
my experience, they don't provide us that.
Yeah, they put it online
It's online a week before the
a week before their hearings.
Okay.
They put them online, and if you request it, they send it to you even sooner if they have it.
So anyway, so right now we have the resolution on the table. If there's
It's
any
a
more
resolution
discussion,
or a letter.
it's a motion to send this letter as revised by Mary Beth, which has been seconded. So at this point, that letter is on the table. Is there any more discussion on the letter?
Can I just ask Tish a question about timing?
Yep.
Is there, I mean, you've heard obviously a lot of concern tonight that, you know, it's moving too quickly. What is the art of the possible with regard to slowing it down a little bit?
So we could have another community meeting. We can meet with all of the commissioners again and talk before either your next ANC meeting. Talk with the preservation staff. We can all meet together and have another meeting. We can ask them about slowing down the process for taking it off the agenda. That is possible.
Can you get the owner there? Can you make them appear?
We can try. I don't think that it's within our ability to make them do that. But I'm sure if they've already received a letter from the owner, then perhaps the preservation office can give us a bit more light on